Eric Wilson, a 38-year-old architect from Seattle, had spent weeks planning the perfect surprise for his wife, Layla, to celebrate their 10th anniversary. He'd booked tickets for a dream trip to Paris, a city she'd always wanted to visit. Their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, was staying with her grandparents, giving Eric and Layla a rare evening alone. He'd cooked her favorite meal, set the table with care, and even lit a few candles to set the mood. As they sat down to eat, Eric slid the envelope with the tickets across the table, his heart racing with anticipation. "Happy anniversary, Layla," he said, his voice warm with excitement. Layla opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the tickets. For a moment, Eric thought he saw a flicker of joy, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She set the tickets down and took a sip of wine, her expression unreadable. "That's sweet," she said, her tone oddly flat. Then, with the same casualness she might use to mention a grocery list, she added, "By the way, I'm going out with a colleague on Friday. Just dinner." Eric froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The words hit like a punch, but he didn't flinch. He blinked, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke, but Layla just picked up her glass again, avoiding his gaze. The silence stretched, heavy and sharp. "Dinner," he repeated, keeping his voice steady, though his mind raced. Was this a test? A prank? Or something worse? "It's nothing serious," Layla said, shrugging as if discussing the weather. "Just catching up with someone from work. It doesn't change anything between us." Her words were light, almost rehearsed, but Eric caught the slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She was watching him, waiting for a reaction. Eric's pulse quickened, but he refused to give her what she wanted. If this was a game, he wasn't going to lose. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a small, controlled smile. "Interesting," he said, his tone deliberately neutral. "Good for you." Layla's eyes narrowed, just for a second, betraying a hint of surprise. She hadn't expected that. She'd probably imagined he'd explode, shout, demand answers, or beg her to reconsider. But Eric wasn't that predictable. He'd spent years navigating high-stakes projects at work, keeping his cool under pressure. If Layla thought she could rattle him, she was wrong. "Really?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity, maybe even doubt. "You're okay with it?" Eric shrugged, picking up his fork and pushing food around his plate. "Why wouldn't I be? You said it's just dinner." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before adding, "Actually, I might go out myself. There's this woman, Sophia, from the charity run I did last month. We've been talking. Could be fun to grab a drink." The shift in Layla's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders stiffened, and her fingers paused on her glass. For the first time that evening, she looked at him directly, her eyes searching for a crack in his calm facade. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice quieter now, less certain. Eric met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Why not? If you're exploring, maybe I should too." He took a slow sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Layla tried to laugh it off, but the sound was forced brittle. "Well, that's unexpected," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Eric didn't respond. He didn't need to. The seed was planted, and he could see it taking root. Layla's confidence, so solid moments ago, was starting to fray. She pushed her plate away, her appetite seemingly gone. "So, who's this Sophia?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but Eric caught the edge in her voice. He tilted his head, as if considering whether to answer. "Just someone I met. Nice, runs marathons, does some volunteer work." We clicked. He kept it vague, knowing it would drive her crazy. Layla's fingers tapped lightly on the table, a nervous habit she probably didn't even realize she had. "Clicked, huh?" she said, her tone sharper now. "Didn't think you were the type to click with someone new." Eric raised an eyebrow, his smile faint but deliberate. "Funny, I didn't think you were the type to go on dates with colleagues." The words landed like a dart, and Layla's mask slipped for a moment. Her eyes widened, just slightly, before she caught herself and forced another smile. "It's not a date, Eric. Don't make it weird." "I'm not," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You set the rules, Layla. I'm just playing by them." The rest of the meal passed in near silence, the clink of cutlery the only sound. Layla tried to steer the conversation to mundane topics. Emma's school, a work project, but Eric kept his responses short, his attention elsewhere. He could feel her watching him, trying to gauge his mood, but he gave her nothing. As they cleared the table, Layla lingered, her movements slower than usual. "You're really okay with this?" she asked again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Eric turned to her, wiping his hands on a towel. "You said it doesn't change anything, right? So we're good." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, letting her see the steel behind his calm exterior. Then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen. That night, as Eric lay in bed, his mind churned. Layla's words replayed in his head, each one a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. She wasn't the impulsive type. Every move she made was calculated. This dinner wasn't just a whim. It was a test, a power play, or maybe something deeper. But what? And why now? He thought of the tickets to Paris, still sitting on the table, untouched. He thought of Emma, oblivious to the storm brewing between her parents. And he thought of Sophia, not a real threat. Not yet, but a name he'd thrown out to level the playing field. Eric wasn't a man who acted on emotion. He'd built his career on strategy, on seeing the bigger picture. If Layla wanted to play this game, he'd play it better. By the time he drifted to sleep, one thing was clear. He wasn't just going to react. He was going to win. Eric Wilson had always been good at reading people, a skill honed from years of negotiating with clients and contractors. After Layla's bombshell about her dinner with a colleague, he knew this wasn't just a casual remark. It was a move in a game she'd started, and Eric wasn't about to let her win. The next morning, he woke early, his mind already mapping out his strategy. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was focused. If Layla wanted to test him, he'd turn the tables. Over breakfast, Eric kept his demeanor light, almost too casual. He poured coffee for both of them, chatting about Emma's upcoming school play as if the previous night's conversation never happened. Layla watched him closely, her fingers tapping lightly on her mug, a telltale sign of unease. "You're in a good mood," she said, her tone probing. Eric flashed a quick smile, stirring his coffee. "Just looking forward to the day. Got a meeting with a new client, and I might hit the charity run this weekend. Sophia's organizing it." He dropped the name deliberately, watching Layla's reaction. Her eyes flicked up, sharp and searching, but she covered it with a forced laugh. "Sophia again, huh?" Layla said, trying to sound playful. "You're really getting into this running thing." "It's good to stay active," Eric replied, his voice even. "Keeps things interesting." He held her gaze just long enough to let her know he wasn't backing down. Layla's smile faltered, and she quickly changed the subject, asking about his work schedule. Eric answered vaguely, already planning his next move. That afternoon, Eric texted Sophia, a real person from the charity run he'd mentioned. They'd only spoken a few times, mostly about logistics for the event, but she was friendly, sharp, and passionate about the cause. He asked if she'd be free for coffee to discuss the next fundraiser. Her reply came quickly. Asterisk sure, Saturday works. Looking forward to it. Asterisk Eric didn't plan to make it a date, but Layla didn't need to know that. The ambiguity was his weapon. By Thursday, the tension in the house was palpable. Layla grew quieter, her usual confidence replaced by subtle signs of doubt. She lingered near Eric when he checked his phone, her eyes darting to the screen. Once, when a notification pinged, she asked, "Work stuff?" with a forced casualness. Eric just nodded, pocketing his phone without elaborating. He could see her frustration building. She wanted answers, but he wasn't giving them. Friday morning, the day of Layla's supposed dinner, Eric upped the ante. As they got ready for work, he mentioned casually, "I'm meeting Sophia tomorrow. She's got some great ideas for the charity event. Might be a late one." He watched Layla pause mid-step, her hand tightening on her bag. "Late?" she repeated, her voice tighter than she probably intended. "What kind of ideas?" Eric shrugged, grabbing his keys. "Just brainstorming. She's got a lot of energy. It's refreshing." He left the words hanging, knowing they'd hit their mark. Layla's jaw clenched, but she said nothing, her silence louder than any protest. That evening, Eric stayed late at the office, not because he had to, but to give Layla space to stew. When he got home, she was already there, scrolling through her phone with an intensity that suggested she wasn't really reading. "How was your dinner?" he asked, his tone neutral as he hung up his jacket. Layla hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine. Just work talk." Her nawab too quick, too vague. Eric didn't push. He didn't need to. Her unease was evident in the way she avoided his eyes, her fingers fidgeting with her phone. "Glad you had fun," he said, heading to the fridge for a drink. "I'm thinking of inviting Sophia to the next run." She's got connections that could help with fundraising. He kept his back to her, but he could feel her staring, the air thick with unspoken questions. You're spending a lot of time with her, Layla said, her voice edged with something close to accusation. Eric turned, leaning against the counter. You're spending time with your colleague. Fair's fair, right? He raised an eyebrow, his tone light but pointed. Layla opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, her expression caught between frustration and uncertainty. The weekend arrived, and Eric kept his plans vague. On Saturday morning, he left early for his coffee with Sophia, making sure Layla saw him grab his phone and keys with a purposeful air. In reality, the meeting was brief, just a quick discussion about the charity run over coffee at a local shop. But when he returned home, he let Layla assume more, mentioning offhand how Sophia's ideas were game-changing. Layla's reaction was immediate. You're really into this, aren't you? She asked, her voice sharp as she stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Eric met her gaze, unflinching. You wanted to shake things up, Layla. I'm just following your lead. His words were calm, but they carried a weight that made her flinch. For the first time, Eric saw a crack in her facade. Not just doubt, but fear. Fear that her game was slipping out of her control. That night, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between them felt like miles. Layla tried to fill the silence, talking about Emma's school projects, but her words felt forced, her usual ease gone. Eric listened, nodding, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd started to notice inconsistencies in Layla's story. Her colleague was never named, her details about the dinner too vague. Something wasn't adding up. On a hunch, Eric checked their joint bank account later that night, while Layla was in the shower. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but a small, unfamiliar transaction caught his eye, a transfer to an account he didn't recognize. It was small enough to go unnoticed, but it raised a red flag. Layla wasn't just playing a game with their marriage. She might be hiding something bigger. Eric didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he sent a quick email to a private investigator he'd worked with on a past project, asking for a discreet look into Layla's recent activities. If she was testing him, he'd find out why. If she was hiding something, he'd uncover it. Either way, Eric was done being a pawn in her game. He was ready to rewrite the rules. Eric Wilson had never been one to act on impulse, but the suspicious bank transfer he'd spotted ignited a fire in him. Layla's vague dinner with a colleague was one thing, but siphoning money from their joint account? That was a betrayal on a different level. He wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. He needed proof, and he needed to stay one step ahead. By Monday morning, Eric had a plan. His email to the private investigator, a former colleague named Marcus, was already yielding results. Marcus promised a preliminary report by Wednesday, focusing on Layla's recent activities and financial transactions. Eric kept his routine normal, masking his suspicions with the same calm he'd used all week. At breakfast, Layla seemed distracted, her phone buzzing more than usual. She glanced at it, then set it face down, her movements quick and deliberate. Everything okay? Eric asked, pouring himself coffee, his tone as neutral as ever. Just work, Layla said, too fast, her eyes darting away. Eric nodded, letting the moment pass, but her evasiveness only confirmed his instincts. She was hiding something, and it wasn't just a test of his loyalty. That afternoon, Eric met Marcus at a quiet coffee shop across town. Marcus slid a thin folder across the table. Your wife's been careful, but not careful enough, he said. The report was damning. Layla's colleague didn't exist. There was no dinner, no meeting. Her Friday night had been spent at a downtown office, not a restaurant, and the bank transfer was one of several small, regular withdrawals to an account registered under her maiden name. She's moving money, Eric, Marcus said. Not huge amounts, but enough to raise questions. Looks like she's building a nest egg. Eric's stomach churned, but he kept his expression steady. Any idea why? He asked. Marcus shrugged. Could be anything, debt, an investment, or she's planning an exit. I'll dig deeper, but you need to decide how far you want to take this. Eric didn't answer right away. He thanked Marcus and left, the folder tucked under his arm. Driving home, his mind raced. Layla's test was a smokescreen, a way to distract him while she moved money behind his back. But why? Was she planning to leave? Or was there something else at play? He thought of Emma, their daughter, and the life they'd built together. Whatever Layla was doing, he wouldn't let it destroy that. Back home, Eric played his part perfectly. He greeted Layla with a casual smile, asking about her day, while dropping subtle hints to keep her off balance. Sophia texted about the charity run, he said, scrolling through his phone as they ate dinner. She's got some big donors lined up. Might need to meet her again soon. Layla's fork paused midair, her eyes narrowing slightly. You're spending a lot of time on this charity stuff, she said, her voice tight. Is it just about the run? Eric leaned back, meeting her gaze. Is your dinner just about work? He shot back, his tone light but sharp. Layla flinched, her fingers tightening around her fork. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. I told you it was nothing, she said, pushing food around her plate. You're making it a bigger deal than it is. Eric shrugged, letting the silence stretch. If you say so. He could see her unease growing, her confidence unraveling with every vague response he gave. He wasn't just playing her game anymore. He was rewriting the rules. By Wednesday, Marcus sent another update. The account in Layla's maiden name was linked to a series of payments to a financial advisor Eric didn't know. The advisor's name, Daniel Carter, appeared in Layla's phone records too. Frequent calls, late at night. Eric's jaw tightened as he read the report. This wasn't just about money. Layla was entangled with someone, and the colleague's story was a lie to cover it up. Eric decided to test the waters. That evening, as they washed dishes, he mentioned casually, I was looking at our accounts today. Noticed a few transfers I didn't recognize. Anything I should know about? Layla froze, her hands still in the soapy water. For a split second, her composure cracked, her eyes widening before she caught herself. Just some work expenses, she said, her voice too smooth. I'll handle it. Eric nodded, drying a plate. Good to know. I like to stay on top of things. His tone was calm, but the implication was clear. He was watching her. Layla's hands trembled slightly as she set a glass down, and Eric knew he'd struck a nerve. The next day, Eric took it further. He accidentally left a notepad on the counter with Sophia's name and a fake meeting time scribbled on it. When Layla saw it, her reaction was immediate. Another meeting with Sophia? She asked, her voice sharp as she held up the notepad. Eric glanced over, unfazed. Yeah, she's helping with the fundraiser. Why, is that a problem? Layla hesitated, her fingers crumpling the edge of the paper. No, it's just you've been so busy lately. Eric raised an eyebrow. You've been busy too, haven't you? With your colleague? He let the question hang, watching her squirm. Layla's face flushed, and she turned away, muttering something about work. That night, Eric couldn't sleep. The pieces were coming together, but the picture was uglier than he'd expected. Layla wasn't just testing him. She was hiding a financial scheme, possibly with another man involved. The thought made his chest tighten, but he pushed it down. He wasn't the type to crumble. He'd spent years building a life for his family, and he wouldn't let Layla's lies unravel it. On Friday, Marcus called with a bombshell. Found something else, he said. Layla's been meeting with Carter regularly, and it's not just business. I've got photos, discreet ones. They're not exactly platonic. Eric's grip tightened on the phone, but he kept his voice steady. Send them over, he said. When the photos arrived, they confirmed his worst fears. Layla and Carter, too close, at a bar downtown. But Eric didn't feel anger, just clarity. Layla had underestimated him, thinking he'd stay in the dark. Now, he had the upper hand. He saved the photos and began planning his next move, one that would force Layla to face the consequences of her actions without him losing control. Eric Wilson had the evidence he needed. Photos of Layla with Daniel Carter, bank records showing her secret transfers, and a clear picture of her deception. The dinner with a colleague was a lie, a distraction to cover her financial maneuvering and possible affair. But Eric wasn't ready to confront her in private, where she could deflect or manipulate. He wanted the truth to come out on his terms, in a way she couldn't escape. The opportunity came sooner than expected, a family gathering at their home for Emma's 9th birthday. It was the perfect stage. The house was buzzing with relatives and friends, laughter mixing with the chatter of kids playing outside. Eric played the doting host, refilling drinks and joking with Emma's grandparents. But his mind was razor-sharp, focused on the plan. Layla, usually the center of attention at these events, seemed off. She hovered near the edge of conversations, her phone untouched for once, her eyes darting to Eric every few minutes. He could tell she sensed something was coming, but she had no idea how big. As the party wound down and guests gathered for cake, Eric saw his moment. He clinked a glass to get everyone's attention, his voice warm but firm. Before we sing for Emma, I want to thank you all for being here. Family means everything to us, and it's built on trust." He paused, letting the words settle, his eyes locking briefly with Layla's. Her fingers tightened around her glass, her posture stiffening. "I've been reflecting on that lately," Eric continued, his tone steady, "about what trust really means. Layla and I have always shared everything. Our home, our daughter, our finances." He pulled a small stack of papers from his pocket, holding them up just enough for the room to notice. "So, it was surprising to find some discrepancies in our accounts. Transfers I didn't know about, to an account in Layla's maiden name." The room went quiet, the air heavy with curiosity. Layla's eyes widened, her breath catching audibly. "Eric, what are you doing?" she hissed, stepping toward him. But he raised a hand, his expression calm but unyielding. "I'm just being transparent," he said, turning to the guests. "I found payments to a financial advisor, Dana Carter. Frequent meetings, too. Not exactly work-related." He slid the papers onto the table. Copies of bank statements and a single photo of Layla and Carter, close together at a bar. He didn't need to show it. The implication was enough. Gasps rippled through the room, and Emma's grandmother frowned, looking at Layla. Layla's face flushed, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing this out of proportion." She turned to the guests, her hands gesturing wildly. "He's trying to humiliate me. It's just a misunderstanding." Eric stayed calm, his voice cutting through her outburst. "A misunderstanding? Then explain the account. Explain the calls to Carter at midnight. Explain why you lied about a work dinner that never happened." Each word was precise, like a lawyer laying out a case. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes on Layla, waiting for her response. She faltered, her hands dropping to her sides. I was just trying to secure our future," she stammered, her voice cracking. "The transfers were for investments." "You're making it sound worse than it is." "Investments you didn't tell me about?" Eric asked, his tone still even. "With a man you've been meeting behind my back? That's not a future for us, Layla. That's a future for you." The room was silent now, save for the faint hum of kids outside. Layla's brother, usually quick to defend her, looked away, his jaw tight. Emma's aunt whispered something to her husband, her eyes narrowing. Layla's confidence, already fraying, crumbled under the weight of their judgment. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Eric didn't let up. "I trusted you, Layla. We all did. But trust goes both ways." He turned to the guests, his voice softening. "I'm not here to air our problems for drama. I just believe in honesty. Layla, if you want to explain, now's the time." Layla's hands shook as she grabbed the papers, scanning them as if they might vanish. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're twisting everything." "Then untwist it," Eric said, crossing his arms. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell them." He gestured to the guests, who were now watching her like a jury. Layla's shoulders slumped, her defiance draining away. I made a mistake," she admitted, her voice small. "I was working with Carter on some investments. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. But it got complicated." "Complicated how?" Eric pressed, his tone unrelenting. "Complicated enough to lie about a dinner? To hide money from our daughter's future?" Layla flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Eric. I'll fix it." The guests exchanged glances, some shaking their heads. Eric nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fix it then. Return the money. All of it. Or we're done." Layla froze, the ultimatum hanging in the air. The party resumed awkwardly, guests singing for Emma while casting sidelong glances at Layla, who stood frozen, clutching the papers. Eric joined Emma, helping her cut the cake, his smile genuine for the first time that day. He'd exposed Layla's lies without raising his voice, without losing control. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. Later, as guests left, Layla approached Eric, her voice low. "Why didn't you just talk to me privately?" she asked, her tone a mix of anger and desperation. Eric met her gaze, unflinching. "Because you didn't give me the truth privately. You chose this game, Layla. I just played it better." That night, as Eric tucked Emma into bed, he felt a weight lift. He hadn't just exposed Layla. He'd reclaimed his dignity. But the game wasn't over. Layla's confession was a start, but Eric knew there was more to uncover. He'd given her a chance to come clean, but if she didn't, he was ready to take the next step. Eric Wilson had laid his cards on the table, exposing Layla's lies in front of their family at Emma's birthday party. Her confession, stammered and incomplete, admitted to secret financial dealings with Daniel Carter, but it wasn't enough to rebuild the trust she'd shattered. Eric's ultimatum was clear: return the money or face the end of their marriage. The next few days were tense, the house heavy with silence. Layla moved like a shadow, avoiding Eric's gaze, her phone no longer buzzing with notifications. Eric, meanwhile, stayed focused, his resolve unshaken. He wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted justice, for himself and for their daughter, Emma. The following Monday, Layla approached him at breakfast, her hands fidgeting with a folded piece of paper. "I've started the process," she said, her voice low. "The money's being transferred back to our joint account. All of it." She slid the paper across the table, bank documents confirming the reversal of her secret transfers. Eric scanned them, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said, setting the papers down. "But that's only part of it, Layla. What about Carter?" Her shoulders stiffened, her eyes dropping to the table. "It wasn't what you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was helping me with the investments. Things got too personal. I ended it." Eric leaned back, studying her. Her words sounded rehearsed, but the tremble in her hands betrayed her. He didn't believe her, not fully, but he didn't push. The truth was out, and the power was in his hands now. "I hope so," he said, his tone firm. "For Emma's sake." Layla nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Eric. I never meant to hurt you. Can we try to fix this?" Eric's jaw tightened. He thought of the years they'd spent together, the promises they'd made, the life they'd built for Emma. But he also thought of the lies, the hidden account, the late-night calls to Carter. "You broke something, Layla," he said quietly. "I don't know if it can be fixed." The next day, Eric met with a lawyer to discuss his options. He didn't want a messy divorce, not with Emma caught in the middle, but he couldn't stay in a marriage built on deception. The lawyer laid out a clear path, a separation agreement that prioritized Emma's stability while ensuring Layla faced the consequences of her actions. Eric instructed him to draft the papers, his mind made up. By Wednesday, Layla had returned every cent to their joint account, her actions tracked by Marcus, the private investigator. Eric had asked Marcus to keep monitoring her, just to be sure. The report came back clean: no more contact with Carter, no new transactions. Layla was trying to make amends, but it felt like too little, too late. That evening, Eric sat down with Emma, who had sensed the tension in the house. "Are you and Mom fighting?" she asked, her small hands clutching a stuffed animal. Eric's heart ached, but he kept his voice steady. "We're working through some things, kiddo. But no matter what, I'm always here for you." He hugged her tightly, vowing to shield her from the fallout. On Friday, Eric presented Layla with the separation agreement. "This is where we're at," he said, handing her the documents. "We live apart, co-parent Emma, and split our assets fairly. You keep your job, I keep mine. We do this cleanly for her." Layla's hands shook as she read the papers, her breath hitching. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "After everything, you won't even try?" Eric met her gaze, unflinching. "I tried for 10 years, Layla. You're the one who stopped. You made choices, lying, hiding money, meeting Carter. I'm choosing to protect myself and Emma now." Layla's tears fell freely, but she nodded, signing the agreement without protest. "I never thought it would come to this," she whispered. "Neither did I," Eric said, his voice soft but firm. "But you showed me who you are." The next week, Eric moved into a small apartment near Emma's school, setting up a room for her with her favorite books and toys. He threw himself into his work and the charity run, finding purpose in helping others. Sophia, the woman he'd used to unsettle Layla, became a friend. Their conversations focused on the fundraiser's success. There was no romance, no betrayal. Eric's heart was with Emma, and he wasn't ready to open it to anyone else. Layla, meanwhile, stayed in their house, her social circle shrinking as word of her actions spread. Her brother, once her staunchest ally, kept his distance, and friends grew cooler, their trust shaken. She started therapy, a step Eric acknowledged, but didn't soften toward. Her consequences were her own to bear. Months later, Eric stood at the charity run, watching Emma cheer from the sidelines as he crossed the finish line. The event raised thousands for local schools, and Eric felt a pride he hadn't in years. He'd rebuilt his life, not through vengeance, but through integrity. Layla's betrayal had tested him, but he'd emerged stronger, his focus on Emma and a future free of lies. As he hugged Emma, her laughter filling the air, Eric knew he'd won. Not by destroying Layla, but by choosing himself and his daughter. Layla had lost more than money or a marriage. She'd lost the trust of those who mattered most. For Eric, that was justice enough.